The knock wasn't polite. It wasn't hesitant. It was the kind of knock that tells you someone already thinks they own what's on the other side of the door. When I stepped outside, I didn't see a conversation, I saw a verdict. 2 HOA representatives stood at my gate, papers in hand, voices loud enough for the whole street to hear. A sheriff's cruiser idled behind them. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Phones came out. "This property is under eviction," one of them said, like she was reading a grocery list. "You have 30 days to vacate." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was insane. "This is my house," I said. "I built it. I paid for it. And I'm not even in your HOA." She didn't blink. She smiled. According to her paperwork, I owed years of unpaid dues. According to her paperwork, my home violated community rules. According to her paperwork, they had every legal right to throw me out of the place my family called home. The papers looked official. Stamped. Signed. Confident. But they were lying. When I pointed out the errors, wrong dates, wrong property lines, rules that didn't apply, she leaned in and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Tell it to the judge." That's when the humiliation hit. Not just the threat, but the performance. The way they wanted me embarrassed. Small. Powerless. Evicted in front of my own neighbors. They walked away like it was already over. What they didn't know was that the truth doesn't panic. And neither did the person who would be reviewing their case. If you believe no one should be bullied out of their own home by fake power and forged paperwork, drop your country or city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if you stand with truth over authority, like the video and subscribe for stories where justice fights back. I didn't buy this house on a whim. Every wall, every fence post, every inch of land came from years of work that didn't leave room for shortcuts. This wasn't just a structure, it was stability. It was the place my family learned what home really meant. When we moved in, the neighborhood was quiet. Peaceful. The kind of place where people waved but didn't interfere. There was an HOA nearby, sure, but not ours. Different boundaries. Different rules. Different authority. Or at least, that's what we were told when we signed the papers. For years, no one bothered us. Then the board changed. New leadership. New energy. And suddenly, new confidence. They started expanding their reach, sending letters where they didn't belong, and forcing rules where they had no jurisdiction. At first, it was subtle, a friendly notice here, a clarification there. I ignored it. I wasn't obligated to answer an HOA I didn't belong to. That's when the tone changed. The letters got sharper. The threats more specific. Accusations that didn't make sense. Violations that didn't exist. And always the same implication, comply, or else. My wife watched all of it quietly. She works long hours. She believes in rules, but more than that, she believes in fairness. She never raised her voice when the letters came. Never told me to panic. She just read every word, every line, every signature, and said one thing. Keep everything. So I did. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't just about dues or fences or control. It was about power. About seeing who would fold and who wouldn't. And when that eviction notice hit my gate, I realized something chilling. They weren't bluffing anymore. After the eviction notice, the harassment stopped pretending to be paperwork. It became personal. The HOA letters started arriving weekly, sometimes twice a week, each one more aggressive than the last. New violations appeared out of nowhere: the color of my fence, the angle of my driveway, the way rainwater might flow during a storm that had never happened. They fined me for rules I couldn't find, referenced sections that didn't exist, and threatened penalties that grew larger every time I didn't respond. When I finally called the number listed, the woman on the other end didn't introduce herself. She just said, "You're already late." I explained, calmly, that my property wasn't part of their HOA. That my deed clearly showed separate boundaries. that they had no authority over my home. There was a pause, not confusion, not surprise, just calculation. "Well," she replied, "that's not how the board sees it." That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a strategy. They started showing up in person. 2 at a time. Clipboards in hand. Cameras out. One would speak while the other filmed, narrating violations like they were documenting a crime scene. When I asked them to leave, they reminded me, loudly, that the court would decide. Neighbors stopped waving. Some avoided eye contact altogether. Others watched from a distance, unsure whether to sympathize or stay silent. That's how intimidation works. It doesn't just isolate you from authority. It isolates you from people. The eviction papers were the final act. Thick envelope. Heavy stamp. Official seal. They were delivered with ceremony, an HOA representative standing beside a sheriff who looked just as uncomfortable as I felt. According to the documents, I had ignored multiple lawful warnings. According to the documents, I owed thousands in dues and fines. According to the documents, my continued presence on the property was unauthorized occupancy. Every word was a lie. The signatures didn't match. The dates overlapped impossibly. One page cited a regulation that had been repealed years earlier. It was sloppy, but confident. Because they didn't expect to be challenged. When I pointed that out, the HOA president smiled and said something I'll never forget. "Most people don't read past the letterhead." Court was scheduled fast. Too fast. Like they'd done this before. Their attorney sent a brief that painted me as uncooperative, hostile, and delinquent. They requested expedited removal to prevent further harm to the community. The community I wasn't part of. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. Not because I doubted the truth, but because I finally understood how fragile ownership can feel when someone decides to test it. My wife sat at the table, organizing documents into neat stacks. Deeds. Maps. Letters. Screenshots. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. At one point, I asked her if she thought we were in trouble. She looked up, met my eyes, and said softly, "Only if the truth stops mattering." That's when I knew this wasn't just about losing a house. It was about whether power was allowed to lie and get away with it. The courtroom didn't feel like a place where truth automatically won. It felt like a place where confidence mattered more than facts, and the HOA walked in overflowing with it. They arrived early. Suits pressed. Folders thick. Their attorney joked quietly with the HOA president like this was just another routine stop before lunch. They didn't look at me when they sat down. They didn't have to. In their minds, this was already decided. I took my seat alone at the defendant's table. The room filled slowly. A few neighbors slipped into the benches behind me, not close enough to show support, not far enough to pretend they didn't care. The same people who had watched from their driveways now watched from polished wooden seats, whispering behind raised hands. When the judge entered, everyone stood. I kept my eyes forward. The HOA attorney began with confidence that bordered on arrogance. He spoke quickly, smoothly, like someone who had told this story many times before. According to him, I was a homeowner who had knowingly violated community standards. Someone who had ignored repeated warnings. Someone who believed rules didn't apply to him. He held up the eviction papers like a weapon. "These documents," he said, "show a clear pattern of noncompliance." I wanted to interrupt. To point out the lies. The wrong addresses. The forged seal. But the rules of the courtroom weren't written for emotion, they were written for patience. So I stayed silent. The HOA president testified next. She didn't stumble. She didn't hesitate. She spoke with rehearsed outrage, describing me as hostile, dismissive, resistant to authority. She claimed I had laughed when served papers. That I had refused inspections. That I had dared them to take legal action. She never once mentioned that I wasn't part of their HOA. Not once. When it was my turn to speak, the judge looked at me carefully. Not unkindly, but not sympathetically either. I told my story calmly. I explained the boundaries, the deed, the years of quiet ownership. I pointed out inconsistencies without raising my voice. I referred to documents, not emotions. The HOA attorney objected constantly. Irrelevant. Speculation. Mischaracterization. Each objection felt like a hand pushing my words back into my chest. The judge allowed some, denied others, took notes. Then came the moment that made my stomach drop. The HOA attorney suggested that even if I wasn't originally part of the association, my continued residence and acceptance of services placed me under their jurisdiction. It was a stretch, a dangerous one, but it sounded official. I glanced back at the benches. A few heads nodded. That's how lies work. They don't need to be true. They just need to sound reasonable. A recess was called. The HOA attorney leaned over to his client and smiled. I heard him whisper, "This is going exactly how it should." I stood alone near the wall, pretending to read my notes. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. Not fear, frustration. The kind that comes when truth is present but buried under procedure. That's when I noticed my wife. She hadn't sat beside me. She hadn't drawn attention to herself. She sat a few rows back, posture straight, expression unreadable. She didn't look at me for reassurance. She didn't look at the HOA with anger. She watched the judge. When the court reconvened, the tone shifted. Subtly at first. The judge began asking questions, not the kind that let people talk, but the kind that corner them. Dates. Jurisdiction. Authority. She asked the HOA attorney to clarify which bylaw granted them power over my specific parcel of land. He flipped through his binder. She asked him to read it aloud. He hesitated. She asked again. The HOA president shifted in her seat. The judge examined the eviction papers closely now. Not just glancing, studying. She compared signatures. Checked page numbers. Noted formatting differences. Then she asked a question that landed like a dropped glass. Why does this document reference a regulation repealed 3 years ago? The HOA attorney laughed lightly. Clerical oversight, Your Honor. The judge didn't smile. Another question followed. Then another. Each one pulled a thread. Each answer unraveled a little more confidence. The smooth narrative began to fray. I felt the room lean forward. The judge asked for a brief pause. She reviewed something on her screen. Typed. Compared. Typed again. The silence stretched. That's when she looked up, not at me, not at the HOA, but toward the benches. Her eyes landed on my wife. And stayed there. The room didn't notice yet. The HOA attorney was still rearranging his papers. The president was whispering angrily. But I saw it, the recognition. The shift. The subtle change in posture. The judge straightened. And in that moment, I realized something powerful was about to happen. Not because of who I was, but because of who had been watching the truth the entire time. The judge didn't say anything at first. She simply looked down at the papers again, the eviction notice, the affidavits, the declarations the HOA had sworn were legitimate. She aligned the pages carefully, as if order itself mattered. The room waited, unaware that the balance had already shifted. Then she spoke. "Counsel," she said to the HOA attorney, her voice calm but sharpened by precision, "please approach." He did, still confident, still smiling faintly, binder tucked under his arm like armor. This was supposed to be routine. A minor clarification before judgment. The judge held up one page. "This signature," she said, tapping it once, "does not match the signature on the filing submitted to the clerk." The attorney leaned in. "Your Honor, signatures can vary." She raised a hand. Silence. This date, she continued, flipping the page, places service of notice before the alleged violation occurred. A pause. And this seal, she said, holding the document higher now so the room could see, is not a valid seal for this court. A ripple moved through the benches. The HOA president straightened in her chair. Her confidence faltered just enough to be visible. The attorney cleared his throat. These appear to be clerical errors, Your Honor. None of which change the underlying. Sit down, the judge said. Not loudly. Not angrily. Just firmly. He did. The judge turned her attention to the HOA president. Ma'am, she said, you testified under oath that these documents were authentic and reviewed prior to submission. Is that correct? Yes, the president replied quickly. Too quickly. The judge nodded. So you're stating, under penalty of perjury, that you verified their accuracy? The president hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. I relied on counsel, she said. The judge wrote something down. Reliance does not absolve responsibility, she replied. Especially when initiating an eviction. The word eviction hung heavy in the air. The judge then did something unexpected. She turned to the courtroom clerk. Please pull the property records for parcel number. She read the number aloud, slowly, deliberately, and display them. The screen behind her lit up. Maps. Boundaries. Deeds. Clear. Unmistakable. This property, the judge said, pointing, is not within the jurisdiction of the defendant association. The HOA attorney stood halfway out of his chair. Your Honor. She cut him off. You filed for eviction without jurisdiction, she said. Based on documents containing material misrepresentations. The attorney's face changed now. Not defensive. Not smug. Worried. The judge paused, then leaned back slightly. There's something else, she said. She looked toward the benches again. Directly at my wife. Counselor, she asked the HOA attorney, do you recognize anyone in the gallery today? He turned, scanned the room briefly, then shrugged. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded once. Then she said the sentence that flipped the room upside down. Let the record reflect, she said evenly, that Judge ___ is present in the courtroom. A murmur erupted before the gavel came down. My wife stood. Not dramatically. Not triumphantly. Simply stood. The color drained from the HOA president's face. The attorney's binders slipped slightly in his grip. The judge continued, unfazed by the reaction. Judge ___ serves on the circuit bench, she said. And on the Judicial Ethics Review Committee. Silence. The kind that presses against your ears. The HOA attorney stammered. Your Honor, I wasn't aware. Awareness, the judge replied, does not alter reality. She turned to my wife now. Judge ___, she said, you may remain seated. Your presence is noted, not participatory. My wife nodded once and sat back down. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. The damage was already done. The judge returned her attention to the HOA. This court takes fraudulent filings seriously, she said. Especially when used to threaten the removal of a lawful homeowner from his residence. She listed them now. One by one. Forgery. False representation. Abuse of process. Intimidation through misuse of authority. Each word landed like a weight. The HOA attorney tried to recover. Your Honor, if given time, we can amend. No, the judge said. One word. Final. You initiated this action, she continued, with documents you either knew were false or failed to verify. You sought expedited eviction without standing. And you did so confidently. She paused. Too confidently. The judge dismissed the eviction immediately. With prejudice. permanent. She then ordered the HOA to cover legal costs, court fees, and damages for harassment. But she wasn't finished. This matter, she said, will be referred for further review. The HOA president's mouth opened, then closed. The attorney sat down slowly. The judge struck the gavel. Court is adjourned. No celebration followed. No cheers. Just stunned silence. As people stood and filed out, no one looked at the HOA representatives anymore. The power they had carried into the room had evaporated, not with shouting, not with threats, but with truth exposed under oath. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. Justice doesn't gloat. It just stands there, undeniable, once the lies collapse around it. The silence after the gavel wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, the kind that settles after something irreversible has happened. The HOA attorney was the first to move. He gathered his papers too quickly, hands betraying the calm confidence he'd walked in with. The HOA president remained seated, staring straight ahead like if she didn't blink, the room might reset itself. It didn't. The judge remained on the bench. Before anyone leaves, she said, her voice firm, this court will make several matters clear for the record. The room froze again. She turned toward the HOA attorney. You initiated an eviction without jurisdiction, she said. You submitted documents containing material falsehoods. And you attempted to remove a lawful homeowner from his residence based on authority you did not possess. The attorney tried to speak. Your Honor, we believed. She raised a hand. Belief, she said, is not a substitute for law. The judge then addressed the HOA president directly. Your association engaged in a pattern of harassment, she continued. Repeated notices, in-person intimidation, and public humiliation tactics intended to coerce compliance. The president shifted, finally finding her voice. We were protecting our community. The judge looked at her steadily. You attempted to destroy one. A murmur rippled through the benches. The judge began listing consequences, not emotionally, not dramatically, but with devastating clarity. The eviction filing was permanently dismissed. The HOA was ordered to cease all contact with my household. A financial penalty was imposed for abuse of process. Legal fees and damages were awarded in my favor. Each ruling stripped away another layer of power the HOA thought it owned. Then came the part that changed everything. This court, the judge said, is forwarding this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal conduct. The HOA president's face went pale. Forgery. False filings. Perjury under oath. Words that no longer belong to my family, but to theirs. The attorney sat back, defeated. He wasn't calculating anymore. He was containing damage. The judge looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time. You stood calmly in the face of intimidation, she said. This court recognizes that. I nodded, unsure what to do with the acknowledgement. Then she looked toward the benches once more. Let this serve as notice, she said, addressing the room, that authority without honesty is not authority at all. The message wasn't just for the HOA. It was for everyone watching. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Not for me, but for the fallout. Neighbors whispered. Phones buzzed. The HOA representatives slipped past without a word, no longer surrounded by confidence, no longer followed by obedience. In the hallway, the HOA president tried to speak to her attorney. He didn't answer. I walked past them quietly. No victory speech. No final jab. Just space where fear used to sit. That night, I stood on my porch and looked out at the same street where they tried to humiliate me weeks earlier. The same houses. The same driveways. But something had shifted. People waved again. Some nodded in apology. Others simply looked relieved. Inside, my wife set her bag down and loosened her collar, finally allowing herself to exhale. Are you okay? I asked. She smiled faintly. I am now, she said. I just wanted the truth to have room to speak. That's the thing about justice. It doesn't roar. It doesn't threaten. It waits, patient, precise, until the moment comes to remind power that it only exists as long as truth allows it to. And that day, power learned it had gone too far. The storm had passed. My home, the place my family had built, the place filled with memories, laughter, and hard work, was ours again. The letters, the threats, the public humiliation, they were gone, replaced by quiet and calm. Neighbors who once watched with suspicion now nodded in understanding. The street felt alive again, not tense, not fearful. Inside, my wife and I sat together, reviewing the documents one last time. Every signature, every date, every ruling confirmed what we already knew: truth always has weight. It doesn't matter how loud the lies are, how confident the abuser seems, or how many people watch in fear. Facts, fairness, and integrity endure. I reflected on the weeks of tension, the power plays, the intimidation, the fake eviction papers. It would have been easy to react with anger or revenge. But patience and clarity won. Justice didn't need shouting, it needed vigilance, courage, and knowledge of rights. That day, I realized a truth worth sharing: no one has the right to steal what you've earned, but the fight isn't about destroying them, it's about standing firm until the law and truth align. And when they do, power always falls. Home was ours. And this time, it would stay that way.